Macroeconomics focuses on the examination of entire economic systems, whether at the level of a region, a nation, or globally. Central to the field are concepts like gross domestic product, national income, unemployment rates, inflation, aggregate consumption, saving, investment, and trade balances. Scholars in this area study how these large-scale variables behave over different time frames. Short periods revolve around the business cycle and policies that temper rapid swings in output, while medium and long periods focus more on supply-side fundamentals such as technology, labor, and capital accumulation, which drive economic growth. In the broader discipline of economics, macroeconomics stands apart from microeconomics by tackling aggregates rather than the behaviors of individual firms or consumers, and as such, each uses distinct methods and seeks different outcomes. The formal development of macroeconomics is largely attributed to John Maynard Keynes's 1936 work on employment, interest, and money, which shaped the field's early focus on aggregate demand and the interplay among income, output, and employment. Contributions predating Keynes, like Knut Wicksel's work on interest rates and prices, provided foundations for subsequent theories. Throughout the 20th century, diverse schools of thought shaped the field, including Keynesianism, which emphasized active policy intervention, monetarism, which stressed the role of money supply, and new classical economics, which introduced rational expectations and questioned the effectiveness of policy intervention. Later, new Keynesian economists blended these approaches, bringing attention to price stickiness and market imperfections. Economic output is generally measured by GDP, which accounts for the value of all goods and services produced domestically within a specified period. A related figure, gross national income, includes net earnings from abroad. Technological advancement, capital investment, and human resource development propel output up, though periodic contractions in activity produce fluctuations in living standards, often called recessions. Policymakers search for approaches that promote stable growth and higher productivity without letting the system slow too drastically or overheat. Unemployment gauges the share of the labor force unable to find work while actively seeking it. Distinctions are drawn between short-term cyclical unemployment, which ebbs and flows with the business cycle, and longer-lasting structural unemployment stemming from mismatches between available jobs and workers' skills or other labor market frictions. Models such as Okun's law describe the relationship between output growth and unemployment, while more advanced analyses account for search frictions, wage-setting practices, and interventions like minimum wage laws or union negotiations. Inflation measures the widespread increase in prices across an economy, while deflation marks the opposite trend. Inflation forms in response to rising demand, supply shocks, or changes in monetary policy, as outlined in models like the Phillips curve. Steady increases in the supply of money, tracked by monetary aggregates, can also influence inflation over time. Modern central banks target low and stable inflation-adjusting interest rates as their main tool. Both excessive inflation and unexpected deflation can disrupt economic planning, so most central banks aim for moderate inflation rates. GDP can be calculated by summing up consumer purchases, government outlays for goods and services, business investment in capital and labor, and the net balance of exports minus imports. The distinction between nominal and inflation-adjusted, real GDP, is addressed using the GDP deflator, which signals whether observed changes in the money value of GDP reflect true output growth or just changes in price levels. The money supply, broken down into measures like M1, highly liquid assets, and M2, including savings and money market funds, underpins the functioning of financial markets and influences interest rates. Banks can multiply the money supply through a cycle of deposits and loans, with the reserve requirement acting as a constraint on this process. Open economy macroeconomics tackles questions that stem from cross-border exchange of goods, services, money, and even labor. Changes in exchange rates, decisions between floating or fixed currency systems, and the buildup of foreign assets fall within this sphere. Scholars assess the impact of these dynamics on domestic and global economic performance. Major developments since Keynes include the expansion and critique of Keynesian ideas, especially in the wake of events like the Great Depression and oil shocks. Monetarists such as Milton Friedman advanced the argument that money supply had been central to major crises, and that a fixed growth rule in money supply would avoid destabilizing interventions. New classical economists posited that informed agents anticipate policy changes, thus limiting the effectiveness of monetary strategies. In response, new Keynesians incorporated expectations, market imperfections, and real-world rigidities into their modeling, which influenced modern consensus models used by central banks today. The financial crisis of 2008 renewed attention to the interconnectedness of finance and macroeconomics, with research increasingly focusing on financial sector vulnerabilities, macroprudential tools, and empirical approaches to distinguish causes from correlations. New directions in research also explore the effects of agent heterogeneity and insights from behavioral economics to improve the realism and relevance of macroeconomic models. Long-term growth has been explored through models like those of Solow and Swan, which show output as a function of capital, labor, and technology. These models highlighted the importance of technological progress for rising standards of living over time. Later theoretical advances introduced endogeneity in technological change, linking knowledge creation, scale, and learning more explicitly to growth rates. Environmental issues have also been integrated, with researchers modeling the flows of resources and waste through economies to assess limits to growth and the economic consequences of resource scarcity and climate change. Integrated assessment models now form a crucial part of the study of how environmental factors affect economic trajectories and policy options. Some approaches diverge from mainstream theory. Heterodox macroeconomics, including schools such as ecological economics, modern monetary theory, and Marxian thought, emphasize alternative drivers of instability and growth, sometimes focusing on different assumptions about price behaviors and institutional structures. These schools often propose new ways to conceptualize economic systems, challenging established paradigms and broadening the analytical landscape. Macroeconomic studies often categorize policies by their timeframes, separating those that address shorter-term fluctuations from those that target underlying structures of the economy. Short-term strategies, known as stabilization policies, focus on softening the volatility of business cycles, employing either government spending and taxation decisions or central bank interventions in interest rates and liquidity to influence economic trends. When output dips or surges beyond stable levels, expansionary or contractive measures are deployed to restore balance. Over a longer horizon, structural policies may reshape factors like unemployment or encourage tendencies toward saving, investment, education, or research activity. Central banks commonly adjust short-term interest rates, either by setting their own key rates or performing open market operations that shift liquidity in and out of the system. Changes in these rates ripple through the economic landscape, modifying consumption, investment, asset values, and the dynamics of trade. Most central banks in advanced economies aim to keep inflation near a specific goal, allowing room to also support employment and output, a stance referred to as flexible inflation targeting. In many developing economies, the policy focus may rest on maintaining currency stability by aligning with stronger currencies. When conventional monetary policy loses its traction, such as during periods when interest rates approach zero, authorities may shift to less traditional methods like buying government and private assets, seeking to lower a wider range of borrowing costs. These unconventional strategies are designed to stimulate spending and stabilize output when standard tools have little effect. Government use of fiscal policy involves adjusting taxes and spending, aiming to close gaps between current and potential output. Public expenditures can activate unused resources, while tax reductions can spur household demand. These actions produce ripple effects as money spent by government multiplies throughout the economy, generating additional rounds of income and spending. Sometimes, however, government activity may simply displace private sector actions rather than expand overall output, a concept known as crowding out. Some elements of fiscal policy operate on autopilot. As unemployment rises and incomes fall, automatic stabilizers like unemployment benefits and progressive tax systems start absorbing shocks immediately, providing support without any new legislative action. Both monetary and fiscal responses can influence demand in the short term. Though monetary policy is often preferred for moderate fluctuations, partly because it tends to be managed by independent authorities and often reacts faster to changing conditions. There are exceptions. After severe disturbances, active fiscal intervention may become necessary, and in periods of very low interest, only fiscal policy may remain effective. In countries with fixed exchange rates, monetary independence is often sacrificed, making fiscal measures the main option for steering the business cycle. Macroeconomic teaching and policy debates are shaped by models, which range from simple theoretical constructs that illustrate core relationships to complex quantitative systems that forecast outcomes under different scenarios. The ISLM framework, devised in the mid-20th century, connects the goods market with the market for money, showing the equilibrium points of investment, saving, money supply, and demand at various interest and output levels. The model reveals that as output rises, higher income puts downward pressure on interest rates to sustain investment, while in the money market, greater income increases demand for liquidity and pushes rates upward to restore balance. Modern adaptations of the ISLM model often simplify by assuming central banks directly set the interest rate, reflecting real-world practice. The ADS approach illustrates the interaction between aggregate demand and supply to determine output and price levels. Demand slopes downward as lower prices increase real wealth, reduce borrowing costs by lowering interest rates, and make domestic goods more attractive to foreign buyers. On the supply side, at low output, prices are relatively sticky, but as capacity is reached, supply becomes less responsive and inflation accelerates. Newer presentations of this model feature the inflation rate instead of the price level, highlighting how central bank reactions to inflation shape demand and how stronger economies tighten labor markets, elevate wage growth, and push inflation higher.